Hello and welcome back to this episode of Work It.
We're going to introduce you to our guest first. She is Lisa Williamson, a partner at Natural Shoot, an Australian-based business which manufactures a range of non-toxic and alcohol-free disinfectant products.
But a more interesting time in her career happened before this, when she was Vice President of Communications at Marina Bay Sands. She joined them in 2010 when it actually opened to the public.
What happened in the time is the topic of our podcast today. Just to tease you a bit, she suffered not one, but 2 heart attacks.
In my experience, launching anything new, the intensity of work is off the charts. When people say you need to throw yourself into work, it really feels as though you are thrown into something. A colleague of mine recently told me how during a product revamp, she was pulling in 16 to 18-hour days, she was juggling 2 phones, she very often collapsed in exhaustion at the end of the day.
You have Elon Musk, who famously said that he had to sleep on the factory floor when Tesla was being rolled out. So today we want to explore this idea of working hard versus workaholism. Is there a difference? How can we tell? And if we know something is not right, how do we discern that for ourselves so we live healthier lives?
Lisa is calling us from France. Good morning and welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, you guys. Good to see you.
With that dramatic introduction, listeners will want to know. Please tell us a bit more about your time at MBS.
Well, first off, I had a fantastic time at MBS. Being part of the pre-opening team was the best job in the world.
Right.
And I worked with some of the most incredible and incredibly talented people from all over the world and in Singapore. So let's just caveat that. My workaholism has nothing to do with what was demanded of me. It was self-demanded. And I think you'll find that a lot from perfectionists, people who put that on themselves to excel. So someone like Elon Musk, who felt he had to sleep on the floor while Tesla was being rolled out, I sort of felt the same way when we were building our communications team and we were telling the world about Marina Bay Sands and the changes in Singapore and inviting the world's tourists to come join us. So that was self-perpetuated.
Yeah. But you see, that's the interesting thing about working hard too, especially when you are so invested in a product. You don't even feel as if you're working, right? You actually think, hey, this is such a great gig. You were telling me you met David Beckham, you had all these stars there, and that must have been very exciting, actually.
Oh, it was a super, super exciting role. In my opinion, it was probably the pinnacle role for a PR professional in Asia at the time. The juxtaposition that we can look at is how I worked myself into heart attacks twice, and then now how I've learned how to cope through how I conduct myself. And now I'm rolling out another product globally, and yet I am not putting in 14 hours a day. I'm not stressing myself out because now I have added tools like meditation, like talking to my community, like cutting myself off and not allowing myself to do subpar work just to get the hours in.
We would love to understand more about those remedies. But before that, could you walk us through those 2 heart attack incidents? Describe the day to us.
So I had been working at Marina Bay Sands for about 6 years. During that time, I rarely left the premises. I was always on call. My role demanded that I was there for any emergencies, and we had a lot of people that came through, so there was always an emergency, right?
Right.
So I was really always on call, and it was just part of the role, and I loved it. But the adrenaline and the cortisol that goes through your body causes a lot of different issues. And one of those issues is weight gain. I gained 35 kilos in that first, like another person, right? I didn't slow down with that amount of weight. That alone, through the weight gain, I then developed sleep apnea. My metabolic health, meaning my cholesterol levels, my glucose levels were going through the charts. I was pre-diabetic, yet even though I was tired, the adrenaline was getting me through and pushing me through.
Right.
So the first incident was a walk through the mall, which I did probably 18 times a day. And you know how big that mall is. I was walking from the hotel to the mall to yet another meeting. My head was in the work at hand, and I felt a deep, deep, sharp pain to the point that it stopped me, and I held on to the side of the escalator. At that point, I knew something was really wrong. I didn't really have time to do anything except for get in the casino taxi line. I had a very nice taxi driver who drove me directly to Mount E. I just thought I had indigestion, or, I wasn't certain. And I was shocked when they got my cardiologist down and brought me into an intensive care unit, did several procedures, realized it was a heart attack.
Yeah.
So it was just a blocked artery. They did a procedure that opened up 2 of my arteries in my heart. That really scared me. And I stayed in intensive care that night and for a couple of days, and actually took a few days off. My boss couldn't have been nicer. Where I worked really cared about its people, including the executives. They allowed us time off, but I didn't take it. So that was my first one. And you think I would have learned, right? Who has a second heart attack?
Didn't. Lisa.
I do. I went to the doctor and he gave me medications, and he suggested that I lose weight, and he suggested that I take better care of myself, and he suggested many different remedies that could help me.
Which I guess you did, perhaps for a few days.
I did a few things, yes. But I really didn't put my heart into it, right?
How much longer did it take before the second one came into place?
As the overachiever that I was, I had that second one within 3 years. I didn't really slow down. It was a very similar situation at work again. Thank goodness I was at work in Singapore when these things happened. Again, not necessarily anything stressful was going on. It was a typical day. I remember I was going to another meeting, and this time I was able to call someone to help me. I had a PA who came and helped me get to the taxi. We called taxi again because I didn't want to embarrass myself by making a big deal out of it. And they put me in the taxi again to Mount E. Who knew me?
Same doctor.
Same doctor. Rather embarrassing. And exactly the same thing happened again, right? But this time I was absolutely terrified. At that point, a single mother of a teenage son. We had a lot of plans for our lives, and I wasn't ready to go anywhere. So I was going to do everything it took to stop this.
Even when you were in hospital the first time around, I'm assuming you were still thinking about work, right?
Oh, yeah.
Did anyone around you say anything like, hey, Lisa, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be resting? I know a lot of people do say that, but how was it like for you?
From a HR perspective, they were certainly saying, don't be silly. And then my boss was also saying, don't be silly. My team were the ones who were very supportive, saying, don't come back here. Like, you need to rest. So it's your immediate colleagues around you that can really see you 24/7 at the job, that really see the type of person you are and the amount of energy that you're expending. Workaholics don't just put pressure on themselves. We also put pressure on everybody else around us. So my team really were great, and they knew exactly what I was doing to myself.
Now, not to discount the episode I've gone through, but obviously working hard is almost part and parcel of the DNA, especially in Singapore.
Yes.
But according to Harvard Business Review, there is a difference between working long hours or working hard and workaholism. The latter is described as people who struggle psychologically to detach themselves from work. So it's like alcoholism affects other parts of your life, like your relationship, your sleep, your balance. Then, of course, it becomes a problem. In your own experience, do you see a distinction? And how can people tell whether they are just working hard or tiptoeing into workaholism?
I've never heard that before, and it makes so much sense. And I'm going to look that up when we're finished, because it's absolutely true. How I see the distinction now, as I said earlier, I'm going through rolling another product out, and I'm feeling nothing of that, right? And I'm exercising, I'm doing what I need to do, and I'm keeping my weight off, and et cetera, but only with tools, because I recognize the issues. The issues to me that I found were, I started detaching myself from my group of friends, from my community. while we were going up to the opening of Marina Bay Sands, which was a big, big deal, I was asked to dinners, I was asked to birthday parties, the typical Singapore social whirl. And I started saying no to everything. And my excuse was work. And no one understood, in my opinion, my warped opinion, nobody understood how busy I was. People would try to call me at work during working hours, and I would think to myself, why would they think I'm going to take a personal call during working hours? So I really cut myself off.
Right.
And it became my number one, my end all, my be all. I missed things from my son's school. If you have children, you know how important that is in their development. When my son did call me, if he had emergency at home, if he did call me, he would start with, and he was young, he would start with, "Hi, Mom. I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're busy."
Oh.
And to this day, he's a 23-year-old now. To this day, he still calls me and starts every call like that. What have I done to my child? The first rule of thumb to notice if you have that in your personality or if you're going in that direction is the fact that you've cut yourself off from your normal community. And your excuse, before you even think of a yes, it's always a no, and your excuse is work, and why can't they understand?
That's such a powerful point. Yeah. I never saw it that way too. Now that you mentioned it, I'm recalling people for whom work is very important. And that's exactly what they say. I'm too busy. I'm sorry. I'm going to miss your birthday. I'm going to miss Chinese New Year. I've got this big pitch coming up.
I have university friends who are so busy, or so they claim, that every time we want to organize meetup, you'll be like, we can only meet 6 months later. We can only meet second half of the year.
Yes.
But having said that, of course, I'm also guilty of this. I remember missing out on the birth of my third child. Every time his birthday happens, I'm reminded of the fact that I miss out on that because I have to attend some media event.
Yeah.
And with media, it doesn't happen again. And I think that was the other thing for me. These events, when you're covering it live, Adrienne, when you have to be there, these events don't happen again. So it's very easy to have your day, your week, your month, your quarter, just a roll of important events. And where do you slot your needs for yourself in? Your exercise time, which keeps you well enough. How do you select the right food to nourish yourself? When I was going at the rate I was going, my diet was horrible. There's great food choices around my old office, but when you're eating on the run, truly walking through the mall, picking up something and eating it while you're going to the next meeting, you're not getting good nutrition.
Usually pizzas and burgers and the like, right?
French fries are easy to pick up while you walk.
Are you looking for ways to make your money work harder for you? Or need tips on saving, investing, and making financial decisions? Join me, Sarah Alcalde, on Money Talks, CNA's top personal finance podcast. From investment basics to the FIRE movement and legacy planning, I look at financial trends and news stories that matter to you. Check out our complete playlist on the CNA app, Apple and Google Podcasts, or Spotify. You can also follow us or subscribe for new weekly episodes.
Do you think the nature of your job may have played a huge part, or overworking or workaholism could affect any job functions?
I think it can affect any facet of job functions, with the exception of maybe those that you leave your work at work, right?
Yep.
So if your role is to create something and you can only create it in a specific space, then I can see that you leave that behind and then you go and you have the rest, your real life, your home life, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, I think you can be a workaholic and you can choose to be a workaholic or become a workaholic. These days, we've got phones, right? We take our office with us. We're all working from home anyway.
Well, that was the interesting thing I was trying to figure out, because I was asking my colleague, do you think you're a workaholic? Do you think I'm a workaholic? We had trouble trying to figure this out because we think it's a personality kind of thing. Or perhaps in my case, it would have been during a season. When I was younger, I certainly paid a lot of attention to work. Now that I'm older and it's a different season in my life, and so it's not that important anymore.
But do you think culturally it might be more of an acceptable answer to being busy? because every time you meet up with someone you haven't seen for a long time, the expected answer will be, oh, I'm busy at work, I'm busy with this, busy at that. People may flinch a little bit if you just say, oh, I have plenty of free time, I have nothing to do.
Busy is not an emotion. People say, like, how are you? And in the past, we would say, I'm great, thanks. But now everyone says, really busy.
Yes.
Right? It's a badge of honor.
Yes.
It became a badge of honor. Now, I think the generation below me, maybe below you guys, the next generation coming up, I think that they've seen through this.
Right.
I hope our lives are a cautionary tale for these young people.
Right.
And they will not be so busy. Although I've heard my son say many times to his friends, he must get it from me. Oh, I'm really busy. And I'm thinking, are you? Weren't you just like scrolling?
They're busy with social media.
Exactly.
There was a study done in 2016 by the World Health Organization. They found that there was a link between long working hours and physical health. So it concluded that people who worked 55 or more hours per week had like a 35% higher risk of a stroke and a 17% higher risk of dying from heart disease compared to those who worked between 35 to 40 hours a week. I have to admit, the typical Singaporean, I did the calculation and it was like something like 9 to 8 p.m. and I was thinking 8 p.m. is not that long.
Exactly.
That is a sign.
But more importantly, right, usually when we think of health issues, we think, okay, I'm drinking too much, or I'm smoking, or I'm eating too much cheese, or whatever. This one says actually work can kill you. Were you really aware of the physical signs your body was giving and maybe the red flags that were coming up that you ignored?
Well, absolutely, because 30 kilos of weight doesn't go unnoticed.
Okay.
And was very, very polite about that. But I knew I didn't have the energy I used to have when I was out of work. When I did get out to walk on the beach, play with my son, I did notice that I was told by my doctor constantly, because cortisol, what they talk about, it's the cortisol, the fight or flight. I think if you're a workaholic, and again, this is just my experience, so I don't know what the data says, but for me, it's like I woke up in fight or flight every day. Every morning, I was like, bam. Okay, I didn't wake up gently with bird song. I was like, right.
No one's singing in the background for you.
No one. I was like, right, what do we have today? How am I going to get through it? And I've got, 17 meetings today and half an hour at a time. And then I have to move through this. But it made me feel alive. You get really sucked into it. Look, you don't do anything. You're an alcoholic because you're getting something from it, whatever that is,
exactly.
So you're a workaholic. People become workaholics because they get something from it. So for me, perhaps it was validation, self-validation, validation from others that I was successful or I had done something with my life, or you get the awestruck friends that were like, oh, you work so hard. And I'd be like, oh, well, that's just what we do, Meanwhile, I was killing myself.
How difficult was it when, over your second instance, when you realized you have to make changes? And obviously, there are things that a doctor has told you. You have to reduce your weight, you have to do this, you have to do that. But I think importantly is you do have to reduce the amount of work or the number of hours to commit at the office. How did you go through that? Because I would imagine you would have closely related or associated the number of hours to the kind of intent and hard work that you put in the office. To ask you to reduce it seems to be telling you to give your work a discount. How do you overcome that?
Well, I had a lot of conversations with those around me in the office, and most importantly, my boss, who was just a wise man. I got to know him personally over the time I worked for him for 10 years. He was a family man, worked very, very hard, but he managed some balance in his life. What I had to do, I was engulfed. So the way I look at it is I was engulfed in so many different suggestions for me to get better. There were so many different ideas of how I could do this, how I could lose the weight, how I could maintain my balance. I read books. I read Huffington's book. I read Lean In. I read Rest. You name it. I've read every title. And my cardiologist basically said, look, you need to stop doing what you're doing. Whatever you're doing right now, you need to stop it. So I was engulfed in so many things that at one point I just realized I needed to pick one thing. Just pick one thing. And so I first started walking, just walking. And that's all I did. I got up a half an hour earlier and I started walking. And then I started seeing more clearly. Because I started walking, it was like a walking meditation. So I gave myself an hour to think about my day and think about what I was going to do to keep myself healthy and balanced while doing the job that was required of me. No one noticed. What killed me, what really slayed me, is I made a huge change in my working hours. I made a huge change in my kind of stress levels. I decided not to get so emotionally involved in every decision, and really step back. And what I realized is people step in to fill that void. They were ready. And I think some of them were really thankful too. Right? And they didn't notice. And the ones that did said, good on you. It was only after I did that for about 6 months and I started seeing real changes in my health that I got really serious about things. And that's when I decided to take a sabbatical and in the end retire from that role, which was so hard. But I had a house in France. I wanted to come and I wanted to live off the land. I wanted to eat good food that I grew myself. I wanted to see what it was like to not be in such an intense environment.
I really enjoyed listening to that because you're right. If only people took the step and then they see that the space opens up, right? If you did not do that, the space never opens up. I suppose it applies to many other things in life as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So tell us a bit more about your role now. I know you're involved in a business still, so that means you're still working, still doing interesting things. But what lessons have you learned from the previous experience that you're using now?
And also, what is your normal day like currently compared to what you had?
Completely different. Completely different. I am working. I did take a break. I wasn't working, but I knew that I wanted to live a more purposeful life. When I say a more purposeful life, what that means for me, it means many different things. But for me, it meant I wanted to be more conscious. I wanted to be more conscious about how I worked, what I did, how it helped both me, my family, and the environment. I came across a Natural Shield out of Australia and the work that they're doing with non-toxic, non-alcoholic, replacing chemicals in disinfectants and sanitizers. So I got really interested in working with them. The other question that you asked, though, about how my days differ greatly is the answer. First off, my office environment is on a farm. So I know not everybody can do that. So that's probably a silly thing to say, but
no, it's an aspirational thing to say.
It's very, very lucky. And I'm lucky that I was able to make certain choices in my life. So my travel is still there. I work weird hours. I was up at 2:30 having a meeting with some of our partners in Australia just the other day. But it's so gentle because I guess it's kind of my product. I know when I close up for the night or I close up because I'm going to go and have lunch with friends or walk the dog, I know that I'm going to come back to it and it's still going to be there. It doesn't matter.
So it's kind of like on your terms in a way and not running on a treadmill the whole time.
Yeah, I guess maybe I've taken my foot off the timeline gas. I felt like I had to do everything all at once right now, have it packaged, make it perfect before. And now I feel like I'm here. I'm the best person for the job. I know my product and I'm going to find my audience and I'm going to find those people who care about the environment with me. And it's going to work out. Maybe that's age. Maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's meditation.
I have one last question. If you can speak with the Lisa who just took up the job at MBS, what are some tips, advice, reassurance you would like to give her?
Wow, good question.
Number one, make your own lunch.
The lunch at MBS is not too bad.
No, French fries every day.
So what I would tell Lisa is you're not as important as you think you are. I think the workaholism is paired with some sort of ego trip that you're the only person who can do this. I got so involved in everything and I would tell my younger self, step back, don't raise your hand every time. You've got nothing to prove, just be who you are.
That's so wonderful to hear.
The Japanese have this concept of karoshi, which literally means work to death. Now, I don't think any one of us wants to die at our desk.
That's quite a horrific thought to me. While preparing for this episode, I wondered what makes someone a workaholic. So that was a little test that I found online. And here are some of the questions. Do you think about work when you're done at work for the day? Do you work on weekends? Do you have trouble leaving your phone? Worried about work calls when you're on holiday? Do you check your emails incessantly? Do you feel guilty when you don't work?
If you answered yes to all these questions, perhaps you are wedded too closely to your job. And if you start having headaches, insomnia, or trouble coping, those may be blinking red lights too.
We know stress levels can trigger things like blood pressure and cortisol levels to stay elevated. These then end up as risk factors for strokes and heart disease.
Putting in many hours at work is not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you love what you do. I personally done that before. It's really knowing when it has crossed the line and is making you sick, literally. The problem is it can be a bit too late.
Yeah. I hope you found Lisa's story inspirational. I know I did. Perhaps even a cautionary tale. If you liked this episode, however, do us a favor. Go to your favorite podcast app, whether it's Spotify or Apple. Click follow. Better yet, give us a review. Every bit of feedback helps us get better.
Thanks to the team behind this episode, Jacqueline Chan, Joanne Chan, and Sai. I'm Adrian.
And I'm Crispina, signing off.